Hi everyone, Stepan here. It's Friday, so welcome to another Friday middle game video. Today I want to talk about a very important middle game topic, idea, pattern, something that you absolutely have to know and play for, and that's restricting your opponent's pieces or blockading them, and that way making them basically obsolete, useless, and making them take no part in the game. Because if your opponent has a piece that's not doing anything, then it's almost as if he didn't have the piece in the first place. That's sort of similar to when you sacrifice material, let's say on the king side, and your opponent's pieces are all on the queen side, and then they're not taking part in the defense, and that way the fact that you sacrifice the piece is meaningless. When it comes to restriction and blockade, you get that for free, and you basically play material up despite the material situation being equal if you only counted the pieces. I'm going to have a look at 4 different games. This time I'll do something I've never done before. I'll use one of my games because I think the example was fairly interesting from a theoretical standpoint, and it was a good example of restricting one piece and playing against that one piece throughout the game. The other 3 games are actually going to be good, so forgive me for including one of my games. We're going to start with what I think is a very famous example of a blockade, where all 3 are, except for my game. And the first game is Tony Miles versus Vasily Smyslov, played in Dortmund. In this position, Tony Miles is playing the white pieces, and seemingly black is fine. So what's the material situation? Black has 8 pawns, white has 8 pawns, white has 7 pawns, excuse me. White has a knight, black has the bishop pair, so I think on first glance you might want to take black here, especially since you have the opportunity to create a ton of passed pawns on the queen side. It's 4 against 2 basically. And Vasily Smyslov's position, if you look at it from a material perspective and from what you consider to be advantages in a chess game, the ability to create a passed pawn and having the bishop pair is perfectly fine. The problem is that white can humiliate one of black's pieces, or in fact 2 black pieces, in such an effective way by restricting them and blockading the entire position. So if you would like to pause the video, if you don't know the game, find a way for white to gain an absolutely crushing advantage, and after the next move, black should resign. The game went on. I'm going to show you what happened. Okay, so in this position, Vasily Smyslov is in trouble because Tony Miles can play the move knight takes e6, check. And now obviously you have to take the knight. After you take the knight, you basically don't have a way out for your bishop. And now the bishop on f8 is an extremely bad piece because there are pawns on e7 and g7. And of course, if black is given a couple of moves, for example, black plays the move g6, then he would be able to use the h6 square and probably continue with something like g5, undermining the f4 pawn, which is about to move up the board. But what's certain is that the e pawns are not going anywhere. These pawns are not moving for the rest of the game. So Tony Miles continued with h4, which is an incredibly good move. Now black can try g6, black can try h6, both fail because white is going to have pawns on h4 and on f4. After g6, what happened in the game, he played the move f4, and now it's game over. And that's it. You're playing a bishop down. And this position is so winning for white that black has absolutely nothing he can do. So the bishop has no way out, and the bishop is dead. If after h4 Smyslov had tried g6, h6, then simply h5 would be good enough because these pawns are very weak. There is no way to defend them, and you're about to drop them. So for example, g6, what was the idea of h6 to stop white from blockading the position, but now we just take, and fine, black can play the move h5, get his bishop to h6, but now after rook h4, yeah, you're losing too much material for the activity. For example, rook g8, rook takes c4, you can try rook takes g6, but rook takes c6 check. So this would fail for different reasons because black would lose too much material and couldn't continue the game. So after g6, f4 played, Vasily Smyslov played h6, probably trying to play the move g5 in the future. Well, that would be ideal. He did end up playing it in 5 more moves, but it wasn't enough. King d2 played, making his king better, perhaps trying to pick up these 2 pawns. Of course, you have to play bishop g7, even if you don't want to play bishop g7, because that's the only way to get your rook out. So now rook c1, attacking the pawn, rook d8, king e3, the king is moving up the board. c3 played, losing the pawn in a different way. bc3, b3, rook b1, and after rook b8, bishop e4. Again, white's position is too dominant because the bishop is not taking part in the game. g5 was played, and now this is the final part of the problem. How can you make sure that this bishop doesn't get out? If you take, especially if you take twice, then black is probably fine, maybe even much better. After hg, fg, bishop e5, the bishop would be a monster. So Tony Miles simply plays h5, and now it's game over. If you ever take on f4, then g takes f4. Yeah, this bishop is doomed to being on these 3 squares. So yeah, the rest of the game was sort of trivial. Black resigned in about 10 more moves. But from the starting position, where white has a pawn less, black has the bishop pair, black has the pawn majority on the queen side, white's pawn majority on the king side is not going anywhere. It's very hard to see that black is completely lost, and it's important to find the plan of playing against this piece. If you play for king activity, if you play for rook activity, if you play for anything else in this position, then black will have enough time to consolidate. Simply moving this bishop away somewhere would give black the chance to stop knight takes e6, and after he plays the move e6, the bishop has a lot of scope. In fact, it's a very good piece supporting the queenside pawn majority. But after knight takes e6, f takes e6, it's game over. Okay, now let us look at a more complex example. This was a game played between Vasily Emmalin and Yuri Markovich-Schulman in St. Petersburg in 1994. This is quite complex, and it's not a simple blockade. It's not simply restricting one piece. It's using tactics and strong positional play to blockade the entire side of the board. So white in this position played the move c4. Of course, black has to play b5. Black has to play b5 because otherwise his bishop is going to be stuck on c8, and of course there is no other way to develop the bishop, because you have a pawn on e6 and you have a pawn on d7. So in this position, if black would play b5, he would be fine, but after b5, that simply drops a pawn, because cb, ab, knight b5 is a tempo on the queen, and you cannot take the a4 knight. After, for example, queen b7, you now play knight to b6, and yeah, that's it. The knight is defended, the bishop is undeveloped. You can at least claim that you have 2 passed pawns on the queen side and win that way. So h5 was played, trying to stir some trouble on the queen side. And now let's start with what black wants to do, and that's the best way to create an idea of a blockade. So black wants to play b5. If he doesn't play b5, the c8 bishop will be dead for the rest of the game. Hence, you have to stop b5. How can we stop b5 for the rest of the game? We want our knight on b6, and once the knight gets to b6, it will be blockading the entire queen side. It will be making the bishop and the rook completely obsolete. So we have to create an outpost for the knight. If we play knight b6 now, then yeah, queen takes the knight. Okay, so c5 is the way to go, and c5 is a strong tactical move because the pawn cannot be taken. Let's just prove that it cannot be taken. If bishop c5, knight c5, queen c5, after knight takes e6, you have regained your pawn, you're about to take the g7 pawn, and black is just busted. There is no way to defend this position. So after c5, the pawn cannot be taken. Our next move is knight b6, either winning an exchange or playing a3, b4, simply reinforcing the c5 pawn. And white continued knight g4, which doesn't do anything to address that issue. There was nothing else he could have done. I mean, there was nothing else he could do to prevent knight b6. So now So now knight b6, and firstly you have to waste the tempo on rook b8 or rook a7. Rook b8 is probably better. After rook b8, now the game continued. Knight b3, a5, a3, a4, ab4, ab3, and how can black continue? What can black do to develop? There isn't much he can do, and his position is just over. This is such a great example of just how powerful a blockade can be, and black ended up losing in, let's see, about 10 or 15 more moves, and I was so impressed with this blockade, basically making two pieces useless. A very, very powerful idea. Now, of course, playing around with central breaks in this position, firstly, doesn't ensure that the bishop is about to be developed, because at some point, even now, white could simply play the move e5 and make sure that the bishop never gets out. White continued with rook f to d1, making sure that d6 cannot be played. But even if d6 and e5 can be played, then it comes to the king safety issues, and you're still playing with two pieces undeveloped. You're going to have to open up your king completely to develop them, and that's simply not going to work out. So let's go back to the original position. So after queen c7 by black, white continued with c4, and the basic idea is I want to stop b5. If I stop b5, I'm two pieces up, virtually. So h5 played, b5 was unplayable for the reasons already shown. c5 preparing knight b6. Of course, bishop takes c5 is unplayable because of knight b6, because of knight c5, queen c5, knight e6. So that didn't work. So black tried to gain counterplay, but now knight b6, and thank you very much. I'm 8 points ahead if you consider which pieces are actually in the game. An incredible game by Vasily Emmalin, just completely killing black by making his two pieces useless. The next game was cited a million times. I found it on chessgames.com first time about a year ago. And it's even more visually pleasing than the first two examples, and it's even more apparent that black cannot do anything. Now, this came from an IMSO Indian, but the structure is very, very similar to an E6 Sicilian, which you're going to see in the last example in one of my games. And in the E6 Sicilians and in these Nimzo structures, if black waits around too long with d5 after the move e4 has been achieved, then e5 is often an advance that simply restricts the development of black's entire position. So in this position, white played the move e5. Now this may seem like a blunder because of knight e4, which was indeed played, but it's in fact a very sound move and a winning move. So of course, if you move the queen, black wins the bishop. You don't have any option, you have to take the queen. Black has no other option but to take your queen. And now you don't take the knight, you play bishop to e7, provoking the rook to get to e8, and now you play bishop a3. And after the knight retreats, so knight a4, we don't want to lose our b2 pawn, so b3, knight b6. Now, you already saw the first two examples. What do you play here to win the game? I mean, when I saw this for the first time, I was so happy. Okay, so white played the move bishop d6. Now, you can blockade your opponent's position with any piece. Ideally with a pawn, that would be great. But sometimes in practice, since it's your opponent's position, it's much better to blockade with a piece, because then a piece will restrain even the pieces on the back rank from moving around. Oftentimes the knight is the best blockader, and the octopus knight on the 6th rank can obviously cause much more harm than any other piece. But again, you could blockade with the queen, with the rook, with the pawn, with any piece. As long as it achieves something. In this position, it achieves a lot. This piece is never going to get out. This piece is never going to get out. This piece is never going to get out. Black would have to play something like moving the knight, and then moving the b-pawn, and then playing bishop b7, and then playing rook c8, and even then, his position would be worse. But for the moment, where can the knight go? So this is just... Black has 4 pieces. He cannot move a single piece to a useful square. He could play rook d8, fine. That's his only move with the piece. So, I mean, this is so impressive. One of your pieces is killing 4 black pieces. I think this has to be the most famous example of a blockade. So black continued with a5, trying to play rook a6, which I understand because there was no other way to do anything. White played bishop c7, rook a6 played defending the knight, and now simply c5. And the knight has to go to d5, has no other option. After knight d5, a bit of tactics played in this position. Bishop takes a6 was played, and after knight takes c7, bishop c4, still doing the same thing. You cannot play b6, you cannot play d6, and beautiful. b6 played in the game, cb6 of course. Where does the knight go? The knight goes to a8. Look at these pieces. White castled queenside, preventing d6. Knight takes b6 played, but now rook d6, and black gave up. Black just resigned. Yeah, there is nothing he could do. He gave up. So in the starting position, e5 is the move that oftentimes disconnects your opponent's position. And remember that with e6 openings, the Nimzo Indian, sometimes the queens can be declined, sometimes the e6 Sicilians. e5 can be very powerful because the knight has to move away, so it could be very powerful for attacking reasons and defending h7. But also just dividing the position in half. After knight e4, this sequence of moves led to a game where black cannot move a single piece. Look at this. Look at this. I want to print this and put it on a t-shirt. This is such domination that I've never seen domination like this before. One bishop restraining two rooks, a knight, and the bishop. Beautiful. Okay, we will end with one of my games. I was playing an opponent rated about 2100. You can find this in the Road to GM series. It's number 119. And in this position, black castled, which is a mistake. This is a theoretical mistake in the Kramnik Sicilian. Now, the theory is e5, and black absolutely has to play e5. If he doesn't, he is worse. And sometimes it's not hard to prove, it's not easy to prove why if black knows theory after not playing e5, but even then white is much better. So after castles, white of course plays e5, and I've won a million games online with this because people really don't know the idea. It's not common to play e6 and then e5, but in this position it's necessary. And the idea behind e5 is to restrict this bishop and to restrict this rook. If the knight moves away to, let's say, knight e8, what happened in the game, then white is very, very close to winning strategically, because it's virtually impossible to liberate the bishop even if you do play d6, because white will most often have enough time to play the move c5. After c5, d6 can never be played. a5, trying to play bishop a6, can be prevented, and you will see, not a5, but bishop a6 can be prevented. And I knew this idea because I'd analyzed a lot of games in the Kramnik Sicilian, so I was familiar with that. So the theoretical move here, even though this is a bad continuation for black, is queen a5. And now white has to know what he is doing. Taking the knight is horrendous. That would just almost lose for white. You cannot take the knight. You play the move bishop f4, defending the pawn, and I know it loses the c3 pawn, but this is the sequence. Bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes, king f1. Now the knight is forced to move, and now look at the attacking prospects white has. h4 is one idea with which you could continue. I've played rook c1 before. I've played g4. I've even played queen h5, but that's really not that good. h4 is basically the best way to continue the attack, and you play for this. Excuse me, rook h3 and here and mate. So you can see that these four pieces are really not in the game. The black king is attacked by two bishops, a queen and a rook for the moment. But my opponent played knight e8, and now I'll go through the rest of the moves fairly quickly. Bishop e3, developing my bishop, bc3, queen a5 played, queen c2, threatening h7. Now it was best to take on e5 and to allow bishop takes h7, because that way black would be able to play actually with his pieces, but he played f5. And now I start the restraining process. So ef5, knight f5, castles. He played queen h5. I played f3 here because h3 leads to issues, but you can see all the other stuff in the video about the game. I want to focus on this. So in this position he played the move e5, and now obviously he's trying to play the move either d6 or d5. and liberate his bishop. But now the key idea here is c5. And after c5, it's very hard to develop his pieces. So this bishop is out of play. Giving me a passed pawn on d6 would be very, very risky. If he tries playing the move rook d8, that could be too little too late, that could be too slow. So he went for the best plan, obviously playing a5 and bishop a6 and trying to develop that way. But now it's important to know what you're playing for. This whole position is about two things. One, the kingside attack on the black king. Two, and much more important, restraining this bishop. So here, if you want to pause the video, find the sequence of moves that make sure that that bishop is dead for the rest of the game. Okay, so I played bishop c4 check. The king had to move. This diagonal is arguably better for the bishop because it stops any future advances of the d5 pawn even more. If for some reason my c pawn is gone, but okay. King h8 and now queen to d3. And now d6 can never be played, even if rook d8 is played. Bishop a6 can never be played, and black is playing a piece down. Now, in this position, my opponent blundered with e4, that just loses to f takes e4. What he should have played is probably rook b8. If he gives me enough time, let's say he plays a random move, let's say rook d8, then after rook b1, yeah, that's it, basically. He is two pieces down, and white wins easily. So the idea was, after this e5 attempt to liberate his position, firstly c5, stopping d6, and then after a5, bishop c4, king h8, and queen d3, making sure that bishop a6 can never be played. And this is, as far as I can remember, the only blockade I ever played in the game, so I wanted to show it here. Okay, hope you liked the video. I hope you learned something. I hope you find it useful. If you have any questions, comments, leave them in the comments below. I would appreciate that. And stay tuned for more chess. Thank you very much. Bye bye.